The roar of the crowd reverberated throughout the arena as dazzling lights flashed overhead, setting a scene of electrifying excitement and anticipation. Yet, amidst the chaos on the main stage, no one seemed to notice the deadly drama unfolding backstage. Behind heavy velvet curtains, in a stark and dimly lit corridor, far removed from the adulation of the fans, a young fighter stood frozen in terror. His body was tense, his eyes wide with shock, as a corrupt promoter, whose presence exuded cold menace, shoved him roughly against a concrete wall. The promoter's voice was sharp and chillingly calm as he hissed, "You lose tonight, or your family's dead." In that moment, the fighter's face turned pale as he stared at the phone screen now thrust before him, a live video feed showing his wife and young child bound and surrounded by armed men. His hands trembled uncontrollably, his heart pounded so fiercely he could hardly breathe, and there was no misunderstanding. His life, along with the lives of his loved ones, was now held hostage by this merciless man. The promoter's lips curled into a mocking smile, his tone dripping with derision as he continued, "I own you. Throw the fight. Fall fast. Make it look real, or else." Outside, the stadium erupted with cheers and wild excitement. Fans jumped to their feet, cameras flashed, and chants filled the air as if the impending bout were nothing more than high-octane entertainment. But none of that raucous celebration could mask the gravity of the sinister deal being struck in the shadows. Amidst the turmoil, one figure stood apart from the panic, a man leaning casually against a backstage wall, his posture relaxed, yet his eyes razor-sharp as he absorbed every detail of the unfolding crisis. That man, known to the public as Jason Statham in another life, but now reintroduced as Dwayne Johnson, wore a tailored black jacket and exuded an aura of unruffled determination. His gaze remained fixed on the scene. He observed the promoter's smug expression as he prepared to leave, and he noticed the defeated, trembling stance of the young fighter who appeared on the brink of collapse. The weight of the moment was palpable, and while the corrupt promoter dismissed the situation with a final low, smug threat, Dwayne's calm yet lethal energy filled the space. Without a trace of hesitation, he stepped forward into the dim light, his voice steady and measured as he declared, "I'll fight instead." The words cut through the backstage tension like a blade, and in that frozen instant, every eye turned to witness what would become a dramatic shift in power, a moment when one man's silent defiance would upend a carefully orchestrated terror. In that heartbeat, as the promoter's confidence wavered ever so slightly, the stage was set for a confrontation that promised not only a battle for survival, but also a bold challenge to the twisted tyranny that had ensnared an innocent fighter and threatened his family. The scene shifted as the background of the arena transformed into the opulent world of the UFC, where thousands of fans had packed the stadium in anticipation of a main event designed for shock and awe. The grandiose atmosphere of the UFC arena was a world away from the grim backstage corridors. Here, under the brilliant glow of crystal chandeliers and amidst the rhythmic thump of heavy bass echoing through polished marble corridors, the stage was set for a monumental showdown. Banners fluttered overhead, cameras flashed intermittently, and the excited chatter of the crowd filled the air with a sense of high stakes and pure adrenaline. Yet beneath this glamorous veneer lay a dark undercurrent, a web of corruption, coercion, and cruelty that had been spun long before the night's events unfolded. At ringside, VIP guests sat in plush seats, while media outlets and television cameras scanned every inch of the roaring audience, capturing every moment for millions of viewers. In this electric environment, the promoter, now known by the new name Grayson Cole, had made his presence known not only by his polished suit and slicked-back hair, but also by his cold, calculated cruelty. Earlier that night, Grayson had delivered his vicious ultimatum to a young, promising fighter, forcing him to either deliberately lose his bout or watch his family suffer. The live feed of the fighter's terrified wife and child, bound and surrounded by armed thugs, had been broadcast with chilling clarity in that dark backstage corridor, and it was a moment that would haunt every moment of the fight to come. Back in the arena, while the crowd was distracted by the glamorous spectacle, Dwayne Johnson, ever the quiet observer, remained on the fringes, his posture relaxed, but his eyes scanning every detail. Dressed in a sharply tailored dark suit that set him apart from the usual showboaters, Dwayne blended into the sophisticated crowd with an air of detached focus. Yet his gaze betrayed nothing of the intense calculation occurring behind those cool, steely eyes. He had noticed every nuance, the subtle signals exchanged among the robbers earlier, the slight tremor of the young fighter's shoulders when his family was mentioned, and the arrogant, dismissive gestures of Grayson Cole as he strode away, satisfied with his cruel manipulation. As fans roared and cameras captured every glamorous moment, Dwayne's mind was fixated on the backstage injustice, a deadly power play that had forced an innocent fighter into an impossible corner. The tension that had gripped the hidden corridors now echoed in his thoughts as he silently vowed to intervene. In a moment of quiet resolve, he folded his jacket with meticulous care and stepped toward the center of the fray, determined to upend the corrupt arrangements that threatened not only the life of one fighter, but the dignity of the sport itself. His declaration, quiet yet imbued with unyielding authority, had already reverberated through the corridors behind the stage, and the seeds of change were beginning to take root in the most unlikely of places. Dwayne knew that the upcoming battle in the octagon would be about more than a fight. It would be a statement against the exploitation and terror inflicted by those who thrived on the misery of others. As the chaotic energies of the night converged, Dwayne Johnson's quiet intervention rippled through the backstage area like a signal flare. The young fighter, whose eyes still shimmered with unshed tears of terror as he absorbed the promoter's ruthless ultimatum, now appeared even more desperate and broken under the weight of his impossible choice. Every whispered command from Grayson Cole had hammered home the brutal reality: lose the fight and ensure the safety of his family, or risk a fate far worse than defeat. The promoter's sneer, his voice laced with venomous mockery, had punctuated the dire stakes with an unyielding threat that chilled the blood of everyone within earshot. In that moment, Dwayne's gaze hardened, his internal resolve crystallizing into a singular purpose. With measured, deliberate steps, he advanced through the dimly lit corridor, where the tension was nearly tangible, each footfall echoing like a promise of retribution. As he approached the cluster of figures, the trembling young fighter pressed against a cold wall, and the looming arrogant form of Grayson Cole, Dwayne's presence commanded attention without a single word being spoken. His voice, when it emerged, was soft, yet impossibly firm. "I'll fight instead." The declaration sent a jolt through the already charged atmosphere, and for a heartbeat, the corrupt promoter's smirk faltered, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Dwayne's quiet words reverberated against concrete walls, challenging the very foundation of the terror that had been methodically constructed. The young fighter's shoulders, once slumped in resignation, straightened imperceptibly at the sound, as if a spark of hope had been ignited deep within him. Grayson Cole, taken aback by this unexpected twist, hesitated for a moment as he regarded Dwayne with a mixture of irritation and reluctant respect. The promoter's eyes, cold and calculating moments before, now flickered with uncertainty, an emotion completely alien to his persona. In that suspended moment, as the weight of unspoken promises and impending consequences filled the air, Dwayne's mind raced with the implications of his decision. He knew that stepping into the fight would not only disrupt the cruel game orchestrated by Cole, but would also put him directly in the crosshairs of those who had long thrived on fear and manipulation. Every muscle in his body tensed in readiness, his years of training and countless battles converging in a single, defining moment. He had witnessed too many lives ruined by corruption, and too many innocent families torn apart by cruelty to stand by and allow this injustice to continue unchecked. The eyes of the few remaining onlookers, guards who had recovered from their initial shock, fellow fighters whose faces were etched with scars of past struggles, and even some silent, sympathetic guests, were now fixed on Dwayne as if they sensed that a turning point was at hand. His quiet defiance resonated powerfully in that bleak corridor, transforming the oppressive atmosphere of fear into one of hopeful resistance. Though the threat loomed large and the stakes were life and death, Dwayne's steady resolve promised that no injustice, no matter how deeply entrenched, could ever go unanswered. Meanwhile, the opulent setting of the UFC arena pulsed with a feverish energy that belied the dark undercurrents swirling beneath the surface. The arena, renowned for hosting the most electrifying bouts in combat sports, was a vast expanse of gleaming lights, thumping bass, and an audience whose roar could shake the very foundations of the building. Thousands of fans filled the stadium's seats, their eyes alight with anticipation, while banners waved and cameras captured every scintillating moment. In this glittering world of high stakes and raw athleticism, every detail of the event exuded a meticulously polished professionalism. Velvet ropes, pristine marble floors, and high-definition screens showcased the grandeur of the night. At the center of this spectacle was the octagon, a symbol of the sport's brutal honesty where the main event was set to take place. The atmosphere, charged with adrenaline, was further elevated by the electric commentary over the loudspeakers, hyping up the undefeated champion, who was expected to deliver a knockout performance. Yet, even amidst the glamour and controlled chaos, a darker drama was unfolding behind the scenes. Dwayne Johnson, whose name carried the weight of both Hollywood stardom and genuine fighting prowess, maintained a low profile among the VIP guests. Unlike many who thrived on the attention and flash of celebrity, Dwayne was more an observer than a showman that night. Clad in a fitted black jacket over a crisp shirt, he moved with a relaxed, almost casual demeanor that sharply contrasted with the frenetic energy surrounding him. His eyes, however, were anything but detached. They were constantly scanning the room, noting every nuance, from the subtle shifts in body language of fighters warming up backstage to the slight hesitations in the security guards' routines. Every time a fighter passed by, Dwayne's gaze would linger a moment longer, absorbing details that only years of experience in high-stakes combat could teach. He was especially alert to any sign of discord in the organized chaos, observing the nervous glances of one young contender whose lean but determined frame betrayed a hint of anxiety that went beyond pre-fight jitters. This young fighter, whose future and family hung in the balance due to the promoter's cruel ultimatum, appeared every bit as trapped by the circumstances as he was desperate to prove his worth. Dwayne's mind raced as he pieced together the subtle clues, the tension in the fighter's movements, the smug yet sinister smile of Grayson Cole as he had earlier threatened the fighter with a live feed of his family, and the calculated ease with which the promoter controlled the backstage area. Though he had come as a VIP guest, Dwayne could not ignore the deeper, more dangerous narrative that was unfolding behind the glitz. The seeds of corruption, coercion, and cruelty were already evident, and Dwayne's silent resolve grew ever stronger. In that moment, he understood that his presence was no mere coincidence. He was meant to be there to challenge the twisted forces that had reduced a young fighter to a pawn. His decision to step forward was not just a personal act of defiance, but a powerful statement that no one should be forced to endure such manipulation. With a cool, unwavering determination, he began to move toward the very epicenter of the impending conflict, ready to upend the dark order that had been so carefully maintained. As the tension in the backstage corridors reached its boiling point, the stakes became painfully clear to everyone involved. The young fighter, whose identity now resonated with quiet desperation, was caught in a perilous crossfire orchestrated by Grayson Cole, the corrupt promoter who ruled this hidden world with an iron fist. Cole's final words, delivered in a tone that brooked no opposition, were a venomous ultimatum. "You know how this works. Lose tonight, and you'll never see your family again." His words were punctuated by a casual swipe on his phone, which revealed a live video feed of the fighter's wife and child, huddled in a grim, neglected room and surrounded by armed men. The sight of that video shattered any semblance of hope the fighter might have clung to, leaving him paralyzed with fear and despair. It was at this desperate moment, when the weight of coercion pressed down like a crushing burden, that Dwayne Johnson made his fateful decision. With an air of calm that belied the chaos around him, he stepped forward from the shadows, his voice slicing through the oppressive silence with quiet authority. "I'll fight instead." Those few words, uttered with a measured yet resolute tone, sent shockwaves through the room. The promoter, whose arrogance had been his armor, halted abruptly, his smug expression faltering as he realized that his carefully laid plans were about to be upended. The young fighter, his face etched with relief and a spark of renewed hope, looked on with wide, uncertain eyes. In that moment, the dynamic of power shifted irrevocably. Dwayne's intervention was not a spur-of-the-moment decision born of impulse, but the calculated act of a man who had witnessed too many injustices and could no longer stand by while the innocent suffered. His voice, low and unyielding, carried the weight of someone who knew the price of failure and the cost of silence. As the promoter turned to leave, his final threat echoing in the corridors like a dark promise of retribution, Dwayne's gaze remained locked on him. The charged atmosphere was thick with tension and possibility. Every onlooker, from the trembling fighter to the indifferent security staff, sensed that the balance of fate was about to be redrawn. In that dim, oppressive space, Dwayne's quiet defiance lit a spark of rebellion, promising that the twisted power games of the corrupt would not continue unchecked. With every step he took, he not only reaffirmed his own sense of honor and duty, but also offered a lifeline to a man who had been pushed to the brink. It was a moment that resonated far beyond the walls of the backstage area, a declaration that true strength was measured not by cruelty or fear, but by the courage to stand up for what is right, no matter the personal cost. The tension that had been building backstage soon spilled over into the main arena, where the pulse of the UFC event throbbed with the anticipation of thousands of fans. Under the bright glare of floodlights and the constant hum of cameras and roaring applause, the Octagon stood as a modern gladiatorial arena, a stage for heroes and legends. The atmosphere was electric, a heady mixture of polished glamour and raw adrenaline that epitomized the sport of combat. In this dazzling environment, every detail was meticulously crafted: the perfectly arranged seating, the flash of designer attire, and the rhythmic thump of heavy bass echoing through the stadium. Yet, behind this veneer of professional spectacle lay a darker narrative that few realized was connected to the backstage drama. Dwayne Johnson, whose earlier intervention had set off a chain reaction of defiance, was now poised to step into the cage. Although he had arrived as a quiet observer, his decision to replace the coerced fighter had now placed him squarely in the center of a high-stakes confrontation. As he made his way toward the locker room, the murmurs of the crowd transformed into a buzz of anticipation and uncertainty. Fans who had previously cheered for the polished pageantry of the event began to sense that something extraordinary was unfolding. Among the VIP guests mingling in exclusive rows and media representatives jostling for a better view, Dwayne moved with an air of calm determination. Every step he took was measured and deliberate, his eyes never leaving the scene behind him, a scene marked by the desperate plight of the young fighter and the cold, calculating menace of Grayson Cole. In the private corridors leading to the Octagon, the stakes were laid bare. The pressure was not merely about winning a fight, it was about defying a corrupt system that had forced an innocent man into a corner and threatened his family with unspeakable consequences. Dwayne's thoughts raced as he recalled the haunting images of that live feed, the terrified eyes of a father, the silent pleas of a mother, the vulnerable faces of those he had sworn to protect. The memory steeled his resolve. He knew that every punch he would throw, every counter he would execute, would be imbued with the weight of that promise. Meanwhile, the backstage area buzzed with covert movements. Security personnel, now aware of the gravity of the situation, had begun to exchange nervous glances, while a few trusted allies of Dwayne discreetly monitored the unfolding events with devices that whispered of covert communication. In one quiet, secluded corner, Dwayne's eyes locked onto the young fighter, Evan Knight, as he was known, a lean, determined man whose posture betrayed both exhaustion and the flicker of hope. Evan's gaze, though haunted by the recent threat, held a silent plea for rescue, a plea that Dwayne could not ignore. The realization that his own intervention might be the turning point not just for one man, but for an entire system of exploitation and fear spurred him forward. In that charge moment, as the cacophony of the main arena swirled like a tempest, Dwayne's inner voice crystallized into a single, unyielding mantra: that honor, integrity, and the safety of the innocent were worth any risk. With a final, measured breath, he stepped into the corridors that led to the Octagon, ready to transform his quiet defiance into a blazing declaration of justice, a fight that would reverberate far beyond the boundaries of the cage. The energy in the arena shifted dramatically as the moment of truth arrived. The stage was set, and the Octagon's gates swung open to reveal a battleground where legends were forged and destinies were sealed. At the center of the cage stood the reigning UFC champion, a massive, undefeated fighter known for his raw aggression and imposing physical presence. The champion's eyes burned with unyielding confidence as he paced within the confines of the Octagon, his muscles rippling under the glare of the spotlights, and his every move radiated the promise of a swift, brutal victory. Yet, as he prepared to launch into the fight, a palpable tension descended over the arena, a tension that had been building silently in the backstage corridors and now exploded into the open as Dwayne Johnson stepped forward. With a deliberate calm that was both mesmerizing and intimidating, Dwayne locked eyes with his opponent. The silence that fell over the crowd was heavy, as if time itself had paused to witness the impending clash. The champion's trainers shouted words of encouragement from the sidelines, but Dwayne's focus was unbreakable. His mind had distilled every ounce of his years of training into a single, crystal-clear purpose. He recalled every grueling session, every painful defeat, and every triumphant comeback that had shaped him into the fighter he was today. His heart pounded with a rhythm of defiance, and his body moved with the precision of a man who had mastered the art of combat. As the bell rang, signaling the start of the match, the champion charged like a freight train, his fists swinging in wild, uncontrolled arcs meant to overwhelm. Dwayne, with the agility of a seasoned warrior, dodged the initial barrage with calculated ease. Each move he made was a study in controlled power. He sidestepped, countered, and neutralized every attack with a blend of grace and ferocity that left the audience in stunned silence. The champion's ferocity, fueled by his belief in his invincibility, was met with Dwayne's unyielding defense and surgical precision. Blow after blow was exchanged in a rapid, almost balletic display of athleticism and strategy. The sound of fists colliding with flesh, the thud of heavy strikes echoing through the cage, and the occasional gasp from the crowd merged into a relentless symphony of combat. For every wild, overpowering swing the champion delivered, Dwayne responded with a measured, devastating counter, each strike a calculated effort to chip away at his opponent's imposing facade. The intensity of the match was magnified by the charged atmosphere in the arena, where every fan, every camera, and every whisper of admiration or disbelief added weight to the unfolding battle. In that crucible of violence and determination, Dwayne's quiet strength shone through, challenging not only his physical opponent, but also the corruption and cruelty that had haunted the night. His eyes, steely and unblinking, conveyed a message that transcended the sport itself, a message that true valor was defined not by brute force, but by the courage to stand up for what was right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Every precise movement, every tactical dodge, and every resounding counterattack was a silent indictment of the forces that had forced an innocent fighter into submission. The champion, though formidable in his raw power, began to falter under the relentless, calculated onslaught of Dwayne's prowess, a turning point that signaled the inevitable shift in the balance of power within the cage. As the grueling contest raged on, the dynamics inside the octagon evolved with a sudden, almost imperceptible shift in momentum. The champion, once brimming with unchallenged ferocity, started to display cracks in his relentless assault. Dwayne Johnson's fighting style, an exquisite blend of precise technique and unwavering resolve, allowed him to not only absorb the impact of the champion's most savage blows, but also to exploit the tiny openings that emerged in his opponent's defense. Each time the champion's wild, powerful swings missed their mark, Dwayne capitalized with swift, calculated counterattacks that gradually sapped the champion's stamina. The crowd's roar, which had once been a cacophony of raw excitement, now transformed into a mixture of astonishment and mounting anticipation. Every spectator in the packed arena could sense that this was no ordinary fight. Here, under the blinding lights and amid the thundering cheers, history was being written. Dwayne's eyes, sharp and focused, tracked every twitch and subtle hesitation in the champion's movements. Each moment of vulnerability was meticulously noted. With every punch that found its target, every expertly dodged attack, and every strategic block, Dwayne reaffirmed that his decision to step into the fray had been both selfless and revolutionary. The stakes, already astronomical given the corrupt coercion backstage, now transcended the boundaries of mere sport. For Dwayne, this fight was a defiant stand against the oppressive forces that had manipulated and threatened innocent lives. His inner resolve was steeled further by the memory of the live feed, the haunting image of a young fighter's family held hostage by Grayson Cole's cold threats. As Dwayne pressed his advantage, the champion's initial arrogance gave way to frustration, and his once lightning-fast punches grew erratic, betraying a loss of confidence. The crowd, sensing the shift, erupted in a renewed chorus of cheers, their voices a unified call for justice and vindication. Amidst the roaring applause and flashing cameras, Dwayne's calm determination shone like a beacon, a symbol that true strength was not measured in sheer force, but in the resilience of the human spirit and the will to fight for what was right. Every calculated move, every perfectly timed counter, was a silent promise that the dark machinations of corruption would be exposed and dismantled. and as the match reached a fevered pitch, it became unmistakably clear that Dwayne was not just fighting for his own survival in the octagon. He was fighting for the honor and freedom of all those who had been oppressed by the sinister forces lurking behind the glamorous facade of the fight game. In that crucible of combat, the true essence of a hero was revealed, not through boastful declarations, but through unwavering disciplined action in the face of overwhelming adversity. The climax of the match arrived in a sudden, heart-stopping moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. The champion, desperate and disoriented from the cumulative toll of Dwayne's relentless counters, launched one final, desperate assault. His massive arms swung wildly, aiming to end the bout with a knockout blow that would reassert his dominance once and for all. But Dwayne, ever the paragon of composure and precision, anticipated the move with a clarity that defied the chaos around him. In a seamless display of agility and tactical brilliance, he sidestepped the wild swing and countered with a devastating combination of strikes that left the champion reeling. A crushing body shot, followed by a lightning-quick uppercut, sent shockwaves through the arena, and the champion's eyes widened in disbelief as he crumpled to the mat in an unconscious heap. For a brief, suspended moment, the arena fell into a stunned silence, as if the collective breath of thousands had been momentarily held in awe of what had just transpired. In that silence, Dwayne's gaze swept across the crowd, a sea of faces etched with disbelief, admiration, and hope. Yet, his thoughts were not solely on the fight. His mind raced back to the sinister events backstage. With the champion decisively defeated, Dwayne's focus shifted to a more urgent, covert mission. Quietly, without drawing any further attention, he withdrew his phone and made a series of rapid calls. His voice, low and measured, relayed critical instructions to a trusted local law enforcement officer, an officer who had been alerted to the promoter's nefarious plans earlier that evening. Dwayne's message was clear and resolute. The young fighter's family, held hostage in a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city, needed immediate rescue before the promoter could tighten his stranglehold on their lives. As his instructions were transmitted with precise urgency, the scene inside the octagon took on an even greater significance. This wasn't merely a battle for championship glory. It was a fight against systemic corruption and a stand for the vulnerable. The promoter, Grayson Cole, whose earlier threats had loomed over the entire event, now sat ringside with a look of mounting disbelief as the tide of events turned sharply in Dwayne's favor. The once confident figure of the corrupt promoter, who had orchestrated the deadly ultimatum and manipulated the young fighter's fate with chilling ease, now found himself exposed. Every whispered conversation among the VIP guests, every furtive glance from the security team, bore silent testimony to the unraveling of his power. As the arena's lights bathed the fallen champion in stark relief, reporters and commentators scrambled to capture every moment of what was becoming a defining night in the world of combat sports. Yet Dwayne remained unfazed by the attention. His sole focus was on the deeper mission, to dismantle the promoter's empire of fear and to secure justice for those whose lives had been imperiled. In that moment of climactic victory, as the roar of the crowd began to swell again in a triumphant cadence, Dwayne's quiet, unyielding resolve sent a powerful message that real heroes step up when darkness looms, not for fame or glory, but to protect the innocent and to challenge the forces of oppression head-on. In the aftermath of a battle that had transcended the boundaries of sport, the arena slowly shifted from a cauldron of violence to a place of solemn reckoning. The once thundering roar of the crowd gradually subsided into a hushed murmur as officials moved in to secure the octagon and tend to the fallen. The champion lay motionless on the mat, a stark physical testament to Dwayne Johnson's incredible skill and unwavering determination. As the arena's lights bathed the scene in a cool, somber glow, the truth of the night's events began to settle over everyone present. Dwayne, still standing in the center of the cage with his breathing steady and his eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and quiet resolve, took a moment to absorb the magnitude of what had just occurred. His victory was not simply a triumph in the ring, it was a resounding rebuke of the corrupt, sinister forces that had attempted to manipulate an innocent fighter's fate by threatening his family. With deliberate calm, Dwayne made his way to a senior officer at ringside and, without a word, handed over the recovered diamond necklace, a symbol of the promoter's ill-gotten gains and the catalyst for tonight's chain of events. The officer's face, etched with disbelief and reluctant admiration, said little. The significance of the act was clear to all who witnessed it. Meanwhile, far from the glare of the cameras and the adulation of a shocked audience, Dwayne slipped away into the quieter corridors of the arena. There, he paused for a moment to check his phone, ensuring that the rescue operation for the young fighter's family was already in motion, a secret mission set in motion by his discreet phone call earlier that evening. As he adjusted his jacket with a calm that belied the chaos of the night, Dwayne reflected silently on the true meaning of strength. It wasn't measured by the flash of a camera or the volume of applause. It was defined by the courage to stand up against tyranny, to step into the arena when others might cower, and to fight not for personal glory, but for the protection of those who could not defend themselves. The events of that night, from the sinister threats whispered in shadowed corridors to the explosive battle inside the octagon, would be etched into the memories of all who witnessed them. As dawn began to break, casting a gentle light over the remnants of shattered glass and bruised bodies, Dwayne walked away from the arena with quiet dignity, leaving behind a legacy that spoke of honor, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit of a true fighter. In his wake, the world would come to understand that real courage is found in the moments when one risks everything to uphold justice, and that even in the darkest corners of corruption and cruelty, the light of righteousness can shine through, guiding us toward a future built on truth, compassion, and unwavering resolve.